And there are consequences for these. So each of those have not only the effect on our work, but then there are other consequences which begin to get in there, which relate to our personal well-being, one of which is waste. How many of you have the experience when you run into those things that you're wasting time, wasting resources? You know, this is just a waste. I can't believe we're doing this. So waste becomes a major thing. Inefficiencies, unproductive, use of resources that don't need to be used, using people's time ineffectively and inefficiently. So waste becomes one of the consequences of all those barriers. Frustration and anxiety. There's been some studies done with regard to people's satisfaction at work, and people are generally not very satisfied at work. Part of that people are frequently frustrated, anxious, stressed out. Any of you ever feel frustrated, anxious, stressed out with what's going on? Annoyance and resentments. You know, you get poor quality work. Do you celebrate that, or do you get annoyed, frustrated? And if you're under the gun and you have to do work, all of a sudden you get anxious. Now you're worried about whether or not you're going to make the timeline. And you get resentful, particularly if Mark is consistently unreliable. At some point I resent Mark. Never considering the world Mark's in, it must be Mark. So I get annoyed. I also get discouraged, disengaged, and underutilized. How many of you feel like you're not fully utilized? How many of you even notice, if you were to tell the truth about it, you've kind of withdrawn a little bit? You're not 100% there. You don't wake up in the morning, jump out of bed and say, hot dog, I get to go to work with Ginger today. Most of us aren't doing that. It's kind of getting up, you know. It's like that McDonald's commercial they took off the air. Get up, go to work, come home, get up, go to work, that kind of thing. So we become discouraged, disengaged, underutilized, resigned. It's always been this way. It's not going to get any better. You know, resignation in the country is pretty high. Which leads to blame and criticism. Well, there's got to be somebody who's responsible for this. There's got to be somebody to blame. Somebody's not doing right. You know, I could be getting my stuff done if it hadn't been for Brian. If he was on time, I would have been able, and I wouldn't have had this other project. So Brian's the problem. So I end up blaming Brian, or I criticize, and criticize the category, well, management or IT. IT is a hot favorite to criticize. Those of you in IT know that only too well. So we'll criticize them as the basis for what's going on, which leads ultimately to a loss of credibility, a loss of trust, and a loss of affinity. So notice one of the things that we're proposing here. Something like lateness results in particular reactions on our behalf, which leads to a loss of credibility. We no longer trust or believe them. And a loss of affinity. I no longer like them as much as I used to. It leads to an erosion of relationships. But it doesn't look like it's an erosion of a relationship. It really doesn't look like that. And it doesn't look like it's something that's repairable from a conversational standpoint. So what about all that? What do you notice about that? What's your experience with that? What would you have to say about that? We're about to look, but any initial reactions for that? Nah, that's not true. You've never seen any of this stuff. No, you've just nailed my workplace.
I think so many of these things are so common.
Yes.
We've come to accept them as part of our daily lives.
Yeah, very good. So we've come to accept them. It's just the way it is, right? So Molly just gave you an example of resignation. It's the way they, come on, that's the way it is. It's just, and it is, right? Absolutely. So that's kind of how it is. It becomes so much part of the fabric of work that that's just the way it is, and there's nothing you can do about it. That's how it works. Other observations or comments?
I have
Yes.
but consistently gets everything done on time.
Yeah, very good.
And it affects, how people look at him. Oh, he's unreliable, but he consistently gets stuff
Yes.
done. He always meets his deadlines.
Yeah, that's really great. Brian's giving you a great example of how this works. So here's a guy who's late for meetings and he now has a reputation. Which reputation transcends his actual performance? And it goes back to Doug's earlier question that even though that this employee is consistently good on deadlines, the reputation is this person's late. That's a tough one. Your reputation is a function of all this stuff. And Brian just gave you a great example of how does this impact? People relate to you based on your reputation. And the reputation is how you're known. So Brian's got somebody who's got a reputation for being late even though he's not. So that's a great example, Brian. And now part of it will be how do we get that person on time to the meetings, right? Absolutely. That'd be great. And we definitely can do that. Yeah, Scott?
Well, the layered impact of this from a leadership level tends to be much greater at a lower level, at the worker level, than it does at the leadership level, because we've seen over time, especially at where at the leadership level, even a small amount of any one of those factors given off by upper level leadership has a devastating effect lower in the lower levels because it compounds itself as it goes down.
That's right.
And for an example, 2 minutes late out of one of us, believe me, there's people looking at it, but that results in other people being, they assume if I'm 2 minutes late, someone else could be 20 minutes late.
That's right.
So it's interesting to watch how those cascade through the employees and how they continue to compound, and it becomes a much even greater problem, and that's why we have to watch it.
Yeah, that's an excellent point that I don't think we're always responsible for, is it does have a compounding, multiplying, cascading effect as it goes down. And if you're a few minutes late, you just gave permission for being late, particularly if the being late is not acknowledged and addressed in a way that completes that for people. As we'll see, what that would call for is a particular type of conversation so that even though you're late, it doesn't have that cascading compounding effect. But you're right, and it has profound impact further down.